Throughout history, great minds have asked great questions. Who are we? Where do we come from? And perhaps, most pressingly, why would anyone voluntarily wish to climb rocks? Over the coming episodes, we'll be peeling back the historical onion of bouldering and discussing the evolution of Boulderfest throughout the years. Before there were grades, shoes, or crash pads, there were just rocks and people. This is the story of how bouldering began, how a training tool for alpine climbers became what we know it as today, one of the fastest growing sports on the planet. Welcome to the History of Bouldering.
Bouldering, well, I'd say people have been climbing small rocks for like a long time, millennia, obviously. But as far as we understand, like recreationally, bouldering probably began in the late 19th century, like officially documented by alpine clubs in Germany, France, England as well, in the Lakes and Peaks district. And actually, the really interesting part of the history of bouldering is that it has a really close attachment to alpine climbing and alpinism. So essentially, these people who didn't, have obviously indoor climbing gyms or even sport climbing with vaulted climbs and that sort of thing. So what happened was that there was these alpine clubs in the big cities in Europe, and as a way to train in the summer, they went to the closest spots that had like little rocks, and they'd practice like small free climbing maneuvers. And then I think a lot of time sort of passed where people were obviously doing small amounts of like short free climbing on the rocks. It came into its own, I guess hipsters found it probably in like the late 80s, and it really went through like a limelight or a focus period, late 80s to like, you'd say early 2000s, as you were probably entering climbing, where just a lot of development happened around just climbing small rocks.
What are the most infamous locations associated with the early days of bouldering?
Yeah, I think early days is probably like frames like Law, the Peak in like Lake District, a bit of Germany, and obviously some stuff in America as well.
Obviously, there's crags. Are there any specific climbs that that you've seen that were established early on, or are noted as some of the more earlier established boulders?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. As someone who's kind of likes tracing that history, going to, say, a place like Fontainebleau is like getting to do what you love physically, mentally in a time capsule.
Yeah.
And it's really cool. It's quite grounding and humbling too, that you're like, someone did this in their leather boots in 1932. And you're like, okay, well, I'm 100 years from there almost, and I can't do this.
In my fancy rubber shoes.
We tracked down Murray Roads, which was the first 6A thing, climbing in back in the day. Dan crushed it pretty quickly, but I was struggling a little bit.
Flash action.
Yeah. I was struggling a little bit with my foot placement because everything's quite beta intensive and font. The holds are often barely there, the holds weren't too bad on that climb. And this old man wandered out of the forest while I was doing the climb, and he whacked my foot with his cane, and then he poked the rock, sort of indicating where I should stand. And it was a distance of about this far, shifting my foot to the right, and then that was it. The rest of the climb just came together straight away. So I'd like to think that he was, in his 20s, probably running around crushing the exact same climb, which is pretty special.
Speaking of gear and tech developments that came along with bouldering specifically, what are some things that sort of evolved out of it?
I mean, I think there's been almost everything that isn't obviously a carabiner or a rope or rope climbing came out of bouldering's development. Most notable is obviously sticky rubber for climbing, and chalk. So chalk is American, I think it's a professor of mathematics named John Gill, who was a gymnast, and he was really prominent in like elevating the whole bouldering, just for bouldering's sake, like as its own sport in like the 50s and 60s. And the reason we use chalk in bouldering and rock climbing is because he was a gymnast, and gymnasts have been using
Sure.
what is it, magnesium carbonate?
Yeah.
I think, for like centuries. So he was like, oh, makes sense. I'm gonna like take my gymnastics like knowledge in terms of obviously like physical prowess, but also brought chalk into climbing in the late 50s. And then from there, everyone was like, I wanna like use chalk.
He was a big proponent of hard for hard's sake. Like there were a lot of discussions back then around climbing being finding the easiest way up the most difficult face. Yeah. And John Gill, who was an absolute calisthenics monster, got excited by the idea of just looking for the hardest single move or selection of moves on any face. Yeah.
It was probably because like also you could like, climbing has that interesting thing where it can be risky or like really technical and powerful and strong. And because bouldering shrunk the challenge down to like a 3-4 meter experience, he could be like, well, let's push actually what's physically possible. Whereas you'd never want to do that like 100 years ago, because if you fell, just wouldn't be a great like time. Obviously in mountaineering 100 years ago. So bouldering really like, and like through what Dave's saying with John Gill's gymnastic strength, like allowed us just to start looking at rocks in really difficult like questions and problems.
What would you say in a historical context the most famous boulders are?
Well, I'll say one's famous to me is the there's an arête in Fontainebleau which is beautiful called L'Angle Alain, and I think it's about B3 or 6A, maybe like in 1930, or maybe it's even easier than that. It might be like down as like a 5C, I'm not sure, but it feels ridiculously hard. But this French mountaineer, Pierre Alain, he looked at it and proposed, well, that blank wall with a single edge like could be climbed, and he worked on it for quite a while. And then I think the story goes that he was like, well, rubber's a really sticky substance, so like, why don't I put that on the bottom of my boots? Yeah. And from that moment, like, then climbed this arête in like 1930, and sticky rubber on shoes was then a part of climbing. So I think that one's like it's a beautiful boulder, but like has like this historical context. Yeah. So.
The two big ones that stand out to me, there's a boulder called Dreamtime, and it's so long ago now I can't provide full context about it, but that was, there wasn't a climber in the world who didn't know about the existence of this hard, beautiful boulder, and it was a lifetime goal for many climbers to have a go. And then within the Australian context, the Wheel of Life, I think, is the most famous boulder I can think of, which is down in Victoria, and it was the first proposed V16. Is that right? V16 or V15? Grades are moving so fast.
Yeah, one of those two.
One of the two.
Yeah, and it also was an interesting boulder because it had sparked this huge debate over, is it a boulder or is it a route? Because this thing has maybe 90 moves, and it's the linking together of multiple B11, B12, B13s into one big link up. It was also first climbed by Daiko Yamada, who's my all-time favorite climber.
That helps. It's historical to you.
Yeah.
Well, that's awesome.
Well, that sums up this episode. Next time, we'll be looking into Boulderfest and how it became what it is today. Thanks for tuning in.